In the past, the roles and expectations of women in the workplace were clearly defined and predictable. For the most part, these norms went unchanged and unchallenged for many years. But change was on the horizon. Historical, economic, cultural, and political forces would serve to drive women along a new road to unfamiliar but exciting territory. At the beginning of the 20th century, immigrant and pioneer women in Alberta found themselves in a situation and place where the traditions they had learned no longer served them and their families. Homesteading demanded long hours of hard work, and many women now began to work alongside their husbands and fathers on the land. It became necessary and acceptable to share that manual labor beyond the bounds of the home. The United Farmers of Alberta was founded under such circumstances. This organization was highly influential, and women were deemed equal participants. When World War I drew so many of Canada's young men, husbands, and fathers overseas, women again were required to examine and alter traditional roles. Many were left in charge of the farms, many went to work in factories, and many were recruited to serve the war effort in a variety of ways. These years helped to shape a new attitude and identity toward women in the work world. The newfound identity and attitude paved way for the suffrage movement in Alberta. Alongside the men and women of the UFA is where women began to have successes in the political arena. They successfully lobbied for prohibition and most notably assisted gaining the right for women to vote in Alberta and later in Canada. The Winnipeg General Strike reverberated across the prairies, including Alberta. Women were the vast majority of the first to engage in a strike to support the already striking metal and building trades workers. The female history is largely untold. However, if you go through the newspaper articles of the day, you will see that women played many strong and various roles in the strike, including being credited for the infamous act of setting fire to a streetcar on Bloody Saturday. Although Alberta had demonstrated some progressive appointments of women to various non-traditional positions at the time, the law still lagged behind. Emily Murphy had been appointed as a magistrate to preside over women's cases. A defense lawyer challenged her authority, arguing she was not a person under the British North American Act. To discover this outraged suffragists, including Emily Murphy. She then gathered 500,000 signatures asking for her to be appointed to the Senate, in which the Prime Minister responded he could not because she was not a person. Using the law, Emily, alongside Louise McKinney, Nellie McClung, Henrietta Muir Edwards, and Irene Parlby, petitioned the Supreme Court of Canada to include women as persons. The Supreme Court of Canada unanimously concluded that women were not persons. The famous Five and their supporters did not stop there. They continued on to the British Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, who overturned the Supreme Court's ruling declaring women are persons. This landmark event illustrates two very important functions that women used. First, we recognize their ability to use the system itself to their advantage, and secondly, they utilized a great deal of persistent tenacity. This case took many years to resolve and was often met with brick walls along the way. These courageous and ingenious women found their strength in each other and their supporters. They changed the face of Canada forever. And I want to add a personal story here. As a representative of the Carpenters Union, I had the opportunity to lobby Parliament. While there, I spent a few moments at the monument for the famous Five. I was moved beyond words to reflect on the fact that I was standing there representing people like me, largely due to the brave and trailblazing actions of these women. The Depression years, too, put new demands on women. The scarcity of money and jobs meant that either one or both spouses in a family needed to work. Besides volunteering at soup kitchens, women could be found sharing rations, selling personal belongings, reinventing recipes, and other innovative means to stretch a dollar. Alberta women protested alongside men, demanding action from the government. In this era, a political shift occurs. Concerns that were historically women's initiatives began to take root. with emphasis on education, healthcare, and other social programs. Counteractively, the social credit with Bible Bill, the evangelical preacher, took provincial office. The return to fundamentalism took its toll on the momentum women had. By the time World War II broke out, women were ready to take a bolder place in Canadian society. Just as their mothers had done 20 years earlier, women enthusiastically embraced the war effort. They stepped up to provide for and support the families at home, as well as fill the voids left behind by their fathers, husbands, and sons. The number of women who worked during the war doubled. Many women chose to serve in the armed forces, learning new trades and skills. A well-known Canadian example is Veronica Foster as Ronnie, the Bren Gun Girl, who represents the nearly 1 million women who worked in the manufacturing of munitions and materials. Women's finer finger dexterity started earning them a reputation of excellent instrumentation assembly, electronics, and optics. Women developed skills in construction, manufacturing, taxi driving, farming, and other non-traditional occupations. So much so that lumberjack women were called lumberjills. Suddenly, women began to see themselves as part of a larger effort and worthy contributors. It is because of these efforts that the Canadian Victory Campaign was successful. So what happened in the 1950s? Post-war prosperity was something welcomed, but also quite unfamiliar. The average Canadian living wage skyrocketed. This created unprecedented materialism and consumerism. The marriage rate and birth rate skyrocketed alongside this prosperity. The television became a household item in this decade. And the media images of the ideal woman were constant and singular. This may have delayed the changing of the mainstream perspective. Women were in the kitchens, polishing furniture and getting excited about Melmac and boxed cereal. This did not last. The revolutionary attitudes and ideals of the next 2 decades would lead to unprecedented advances for women. We were becoming liberated and demanding equality in opportunities and salaries. While women's attitudes about their own place in society were changing, it would take a while to convince the opposite sex. There were 2 approaches to activism in this era. There were liberal activists who took a nonviolent and peaceful approach to change, and then there were those who took a more violent and militant approach. Their right to control their own reproduction served as a catalyst for changing attitudes. The distribution of the pill was without a doubt the predominant change that affected women. Access to safe medical abortions began, as well as the ability to disseminate information regarding the birth control pill. Home pregnancy tests became available. Women also wanted equal pay for equal work. During these decades, changes in divorce law and property laws resulted, as well as allowing working women to claim childcare costs on their income tax. There was a global shift in ideology. The United Nations established the International Women's Year in 1975, then hosted its first International Women's Conference in Mexico the following year. The establishment of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women began during this time and reported that inequality because of gender needed to be abolished. The accomplishments of the women's liberation movement is far too much to mention, but I wanted to try and provide a general idea of the kinds of things that changed the lives of women and of Albertan society forever. Our most recent history in Alberta has kept the momentum going from the 60s and 70s. Doors started to open for women to enter into the workforce, and we have been doing so at accelerating speeds. Since the 1980s, the number of women in the workforce grew from 58% to 75.8% in 2008. That's a 76% increase. Trends and forecasts suggest that more and more women will be asked again to man the jobs because the economy depends on it. Does any of this sound familiar? Is it enough to fill the gap when the economy or government needs us? I do not believe so. What should be enough? Are we there yet? Just like in history, women must not be afraid to do what is necessary to succeed. We can teach ourselves and share our knowledge amongst each other, just like our predecessors did. We can mentor and apprentice our daughters. We can look for supports, and when we don't find any, we can ask for them. We can accomplish a lot working together and having persistent tenacity. We can start thinking about how we can change the way in which women and girls look at employment. No occupation is male or female in designation, and we must live up to that truth. It is time we start educating our youthful women about non-traditional occupations that pay good money and provide quality of life for our children. Having women accessing these jobs needs to become a priority. Helping women access higher paid jobs that are in high demand is just one way we can help to reach our destination. The horizon is hopeful and forecasts are bright. This is why it is so important to recruit and retain women now. History is just waiting to be written again. Let's make it count.